Before this video commences, I want to concede that it's been a little while since I posted my last Battlefield 1 video. In fact, you'll be able to tell by some of the language that this was recorded before Christmas. Anyhow, thanks for putting up with that, and have a happy new year, folks. Here we go. Salutations, scouts on the Cell River. Automatic here for Automatic Games. Thanks for joining me for this, yet another installment of my Battlefield 1 series. This particular video focusing on the free DLC map Giant's Shadow, which dropped days ago for premium account holders or those that pre-ordered the game, and will be widely available to anybody that owns Battlefield 1 in the coming days. Giant's Shadow is a nod to the Battle of the Cell. See, where the Battle of Cambrai concluded, the pursuit to the River Cell commenced. Of course, soldiers of the day didn't know that ultimately it would be called the pursuit to the River Cell, but they damn well knew that it was a pursuit. Such terminology was well received by the typical Allied grunt. After all, it was a relief to finally see the Boche on the run, presumably all the way to Germany. Now as we pull out here, off to the right, we'll see the River Cell. Just shy of that, a railroad embankment which forms a natural defensive feature on the terrain. The road that we're on, historically, would probably be the Le Cateau-Arbor-Guernon Road. A sunken road, so in and of itself, a defensive position. But not so much on this map, which is neither here nor there was a horse. And in a contest of horse versus automobile, the horse survives. I won't question that too earnestly, we'll just move on. There was no crashed Zeppelin on the Cell battlefield, but in terms of this multiplayer map, it does kind of break up the monotony of these wide open spaces, so it does serve a gameplay purpose. Now, I do want to talk about the map, but I also want to talk about the historical battle, and that takes priority as far as I'm concerned. The Germans are in retrograde, not just following the Battle of Cambrai, but during it and in the days preceding it. Having said that, virtually every day they're throwing up impromptu defensive demonstrations, albeit in vain, and generally around these French villages. So that is a Schnook. But Private Hanley, he's actually got an anti-tank grenade he would like to show this Schnook. So I hope that the crew of the Schnook saw the grenade, because as stated, Hanley just wanted to show it to him. By no means did he intend to use it on them. Anyways, back on course. As the Germans are falling back, eventually they reach the Cell River Basin. And due to the natural defensive features inherent in such an area, they intend to make their stand there, and make a stand they do. When the Allies show up on the western banks, they stop. They're going to spend the next 6-7 days preparing for their upcoming attack, which will commence on October 17, 1918. Now, this is not to say that the interim is that it's all quiet on the front. No, in fact, there's raids, there's constant patrolling, sniping, shelling. One village on the river itself, it was regarded as being flooded with gas perpetually. And flooded is an interesting word to use. I think to a layman, one would assume that the gas just kind of rises and dissipates in the air. But that would not be the case. Gas, most commonly in World War I, it kind of hugged the ground. And it pooled, especially in, in some of the crater-pocked battlefields. The gas would just seep down into the craters and pool up in there. And that was a tragic feature because a soldier naturally is looking for cover when under small arms fire. And so if one's looking to the relative safety of a crater, he may only find that it's filled with gas. That's just hard to see, but I'm the one that threw the, I'm going to blame it on Private Williams. He threw the smoke grenades. But nonetheless, this is inside the Zeppelin is hectic. And I don't even, what was that? Did a bomber just crash next to me? What is this, like a mini Bermuda Triangle? A Zeppelin crashes here, a bomb? What else is crashing here? I'm getting out.
We are losing objective Duff.
while not our preferred avenue of egress, I suppose death will get us out of there. But, yeah, needless to say, I will not be revisiting that, derelict dirigible. That's fun to say. Derelict dirigible. Certainly not in this video. Because after all, I mean, it's just a hotbed, I mean, of curse or something. It's like the Devil's Triangle, like I said. So as we say in Ohio, fuck that. Whoa, 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 whoa. So, I know I just said something about, I just questioned the results of such a contest, but I don't think Lieutenant Saxby here or Horsey McHorseface, his trusty mount, are ever going to question the results of a contest between Automobile and Horse in Battlefield 1. Because after all, they seem to have been the beneficiaries of this Teflon-like horsehide that's at play. Which I guess is good. You don't want to be roadkill. But anyways, I'm getting way off course. We were talking about the days leading up to October 17, 1918, and how it wasn't altogether quiet. I read one account by a British soldier. He talked about the novelty of actually bivouacking in tents. They had found a nice open field, and his company set up a tent encampment. And he talked about what a departure that was from trench life. Not to say they weren't rotated out of trenches on a regular basis, especially for the Allies they were, not so much for the Germans. But he found it quite enjoyable to actually be camping, so to speak. Until, of course, the Germans spotted this position and opened up with artillery, and casualties were inflicted. And I don't know if they went ahead and folded up the tents and maybe retired it to a position further behind their lines, but one would think that they would. And speaking of artillery, the Allies were starting to experiment with certainly a different method for deploying their artillery. Not deploying, but actually utilizing their artillery. Most typically, what they would do is what you would call rapid-fire artillery bombardment. This, or maybe a creeping barrage. But in terms of rapid-fire employment, you would take all of your artillery and unleash it upon a multitude of enemy positions. And you would fire for a great long period of time, but you would fire as fast as humanly possible in terms of each individual gun. For this battle in particular, they were trying something a little different, and it kind of went like this. Phase 1 was you would fire all of your artillery on a singular target. So, say on the eastern edge of the River Selle, there's a few villages, but there's a multitude of farms, and these farms were congregation points for the Germans. So they would target one farm and fire all their artillery on that one farm. And they wouldn't do this for a great period of time, maybe 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes. The hope was that you would catch the enemy soldiers out in the open before they'd jump in their dugouts or their trenches. Although, to be honest, so much for Lieutenant Saxby. To be honest, the Germans hadn't the time to dig proper trenches, not to a great extent. So yeah, you'd want to catch them out in the open before they could jump in their dugouts. After this 2 or 3 minute bombardment, you would load smoke, and then fire smoke on the exact same position. Now from the German perspective, Phase 2, the smoke, you would think that precipitates an infantry attack. So now they're kind of blinded, they're expecting infantry, so it's get back out of your dugouts, and get up to your maximum machine guns, get up to this stone wall, get up to this hedge line, and prepare to repel the infantry attack. Then comes Phase 3. The final blast of artillery, fired from all guns on a singular point. It utilizes shrapnel shells, which, as one Allied officer put it, effectively did the dirty work of infantry. So this shrapnel would cut the infantry to pieces. It was this cocktail, this three shell type attack, that proved quite effective leading up to October 17th. Now, once October 17th comes, and the artillery goes ahead and they fire their cannonade preceding the attack, the way they do it is a creeping barrage. They start at the Selle River, and then they start to fire progressively further east, past the German lines. Directly behind this artillery fire is the infantry. Now, much has been said about the engineers at the Battle of the Selle and the bridges that they constructed across the river. And that would lead one to believe that the infantry couldn't wade across the river. In fact, in several general histories that I've looked at, they almost make it seem like it was impossible. But in fact, many divisions and smaller groups did just that. They waded across the river. At its deepest points, it was about 6 feet. So it was entirely possible to wade across. The worst that happened was that their gas masks got wet, which rendered them unusable. However, there were enough gas masks in reserve that as the day proceeded, they were issued new masks. Now, I say this wasn't, that big of a setback, but Otto, try telling that to the soldier that needed his gas mask and it was soaked at the time. So certainly, I imagine there were some casualties as a result of it. But considering what could have happened in trying to wade across a river, that wasn't so bad. Now, in terms of, I mentioned that the Germans hadn't time to dig trenches. Well, south of Saint-Supple, the 106th, they set out from a mill. They crossed the river and they encountered very well dug, very extensive trenches. In fact, trenches that almost looked like they had already been bombarded. And what this turned out to be was German practice trenches. Trenches that were dug long ago for the means of practicing, training troops in trench warfare. And here they were actually being put to the test. And needless to say, proved to be an effective obstacle, but not an insurmountable one. Indeed, the 106 ultimately was able to overtake the practice trenches. And all along the Allied front, they were... Am I taking fire? From an ally. Look, pal, friendly fire's off. If you get a problem with me, you're going to have to write a strongly worded letter to my superiors. Even that won't work. Anyhow, all along the 10-mile front, on the morning of the 17th, our advance was assisted, naturally, by a dense fog. Now, when you're trying to get across the Selle River, whether by wading or using footbridges, you're doing so under enemy fire. Certainly, it helps to advance under this cloak of fog. And I also want to mention the efforts of the engineers. I don't want you to think that I was downplaying them when I was saying that indeed you could wade across the river. It's far more advantageous to use footbridges. And by noon on the 17th, the engineers had finished building pontoon bridges. Certainly you'd rather, since it helps to expedite your advance, and you'd much rather have your infantry get across dry with their gas masks still usable. Moreover, this helped getting your tanks across and your artillery. After all, this was an all-arms assault, and those are two very important components of this combined arms theory. I mentioned that the fog was advantageous to our cause, but at the same time, it also hindered certain elements of our attack. The tanks getting across the River Selle. Well, in the southern sector, setting out from Saint-Supple, the tank's target, combined with the infantry, was a village called Arbour-Guernon, occupied by the Germans. Of all the tanks that crossed the river, only one of them found its way to Arbour-Guernon. This wasn't because the others were destroyed, it's just that they got lost in the fog. That one tank that was able to assist the infantry assault there, unfortunately, it was targeted by German artillery and destroyed. Nonetheless, by the end of the 17th, Arbour-Guernon was secured by the Allies. So too was the railroad line, and a locomotive to boot, and certainly the River Selle was now to our backs. Now we turn to the 18th. By this point, the Germans still occupied that sunken road that I referred to earlier, the Les Cateaux Arbour-Guernon Road. And the artillery was actually scheduled to fire beyond that at other positions, at farms and hedges that held German strong points. If not for the intervention of divisional commanders, the artillery would have overshot that line, but instead they focused on the road, and thereby helping to diminish the resistance the infantry would encounter while moving against that sunken road. And so indeed, on the 18th, we were able to overtake that road, and the Germans now fell back to a place called Masingheim, where they put up a stiff resistance. In fact, by the end of the 18th, we weren't able to occupy that village. And so, in the early morning hours of the 19th, and I'm talking 2 in the morning, our artillery opened up, and a nighttime infantry attack commenced. The Germans still were able to hold Masingheim. However, just to the north of that village, we were able to take their flank, land that controlled the village itself. And just by nature of us taking that controlling land, the Germans were compelled to withdraw. And so at this point they fall back to Cotillion. And the battle progresses like this. Every day we make our advances. If we can't take the village, we take land that controls it. And the Germans continue to fall back. And suddenly we're flirting with the Battle of the Sambre, in the canal under the same name, in Mormau Wood. And this is another battle altogether, in fact the last great offensive on the Western Front. And so I won't go there, and I think I've said all that I really want to say about the Battle of the Selle. Now I'd like to focus on this Mark V, and we're engaging a Schnook down there in the village. It's a long-range battle, and it's, currently I can't even find the Schnook, but we know it's down there maneuvering. And as to our tank commander, he's just done a fantastic job of keeping this tank in action throughout this entire mission. He knows when to crest the hill and fire, he knows when to back up and issue repairs. And that is an aspect of this map. It's the rolling hills. That village down that we're facing here. I mean, that village, it's so representative of the villages that were right along the Selle River. Whether it's Neuville, or Les Cateaux, or Saint-Supplé. A village that just straddles the river. And though I'm not down there now, when I was down there, you could see the water there was shallow enough to ford. My one regret is I wish that you could actually destroy the bridge down there. I think that would be kind of representative to history, and you could still get the tanks across, but I would have liked to have seen that. Now this level's also got a railroad hub. There we've got a better view of the Schnook. I can just start scoring some hits on it. But yeah, and indeed there was a railroad hub in this sector. Okay, now we're taking fire. I know if we take too much, our tank commander is going to throw her in reverse. At least I have confidence that he will. Okay, we got it. We got it. That's one less ugly-ass German tank. So yeah, I do quite enjoy this level. I wish there was an operations mode, but I know that would entail more than one map. So maybe in time we will see that. And I do look forward to the remaining DLC. I certainly will be putting up videos of that as it arrives. Oh, okay, that was a German on a bike, and I bet he's got an anti-tank grenade, so I'm going to get out and engage him, or die trying. And die trying is precisely what will occur. Now I want to share a quote with you, this by Captain Arthur Impey, 79th Brigade Royal Field Artillery, after reviewing the battlefield. And I quote,
"It was obvious that the taking of the high ground had been a magnificent piece of work. Just the other side of the river was a well-concealed trench with wire in front, and it was full of dead Huns. The slopes of the hill were covered with wire, and the railway had been dug into and consolidated. Farther up and near the top was a sunken road with wire in front and machine gun posts dug in all along. It was a horrible sight. Like 150 Hun dead lay around, all bayoneted. There were very few of our dead. How our fellows ever got there to do it was more than I could understand. They could have never done it in daylight, as the field for machine gun fire was perfect. But having got there, they had made no mistakes. In the sunken road, it was just the same. Each machine gun pit was full of dead, bayoneted where they had served the guns. There was no mistaking that we had won a real victory this time. Everywhere were signs that the Huns meant to stay. He had even begun to dig deep dugouts in places and proper communication trenches, whilst the amount of wire was astounding, considering the comparatively short time he had to get it out. He meant to stay and give battle, and he had a magnificent defensive position with the Selle River in front of him, 6 feet deep in places and everywhere necessary to bridge. We undoubtedly took them by surprise, but that didn't distract in the least from the splendid performance of our infantry. It was the best thing I had ever seen them do, and for the first time since August I had the feeling as I looked around that we had driven the Huns from a position that they intended to hold at all cost. Voluntary withdrawal doesn't leave 200 dead lying on a forward slope with good trenches, well concealed behind and good wire in front.
End quote. And he says the river is everywhere necessary to bridge, but of course he's speaking for the artillery, being an artillery commander. Now on the 20th, there is another battle. The 21st and 22nd shows a lull in fighting. And then on the 23rd, a renewed assault on the part of the Allies. Auvillers and Cotillon are captured. On the 24th, the Germans launch their final counter-assault, which is repulsed. Finally, on the 25th, the battle's over. I might add that on the 26th, Erich Ludendorff, he submits his resignation to the Kaiser, which is accepted. Von Hindenburg attempts to do the same, but his resignation is rejected. Well, that about does it. As you can see, we lost this multiplayer battle of conquest, but the Allies historically won this battle, obviously. As usual, I'm Automatic for Automatic Games. Folks, I appreciate you watching. If you like this video, and of course, I will talk to you soon. Friends.